My husband and I had been looking forward to our date night for weeks. We had hired a new babysitter for our 2 children, a sweet girl named Lily, who had come highly recommended by our neighbours. We left the house feeling confident that our children were in good hands, but as the night wore on, we couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong. We tried calling Lily several times to check in, but she didn't answer her phone. We assumed she was just busy playing with the kids or maybe putting them to bed. But when we got home, the house was silent, too silent. We called out for Lily and our children, but no one answered. We searched the entire house, but it was empty. Our children's toys were scattered on the floor, and the TV was still on, but there was no sign of Lily or our kids. Panic soon set in, as we realised that something terrible must have happened. We called the police and they arrived within minutes. They searched the house themselves and the surrounding area, but they couldn't find any trace of Lily or our children. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The days quickly went by and there was still no sign of our children. The police were stumped, and we were beside ourselves with grief and fear. Then, one night, we heard a knock at the door. It was Lily, looking dishevelled and scared. She told us about how she had taken the children out for ice cream, as they were being very well behaved. But what she said next sent chills down our spines. During the drive, she received a phone call from her ex-boyfriend who wanted to meet up and apologise for how he behaved during their relationship. So she decided to drive to his house first, as it was on the way. As she approached the house, her ex-boyfriend was on the driveway, waiting for her. Lily got out of the car, but as she got closer to her ex-boyfriend, she noticed that he was holding something. After seeing the look in his eyes, she was instantly overcome with fear, as she now realised the thing he was holding was a gun. She tried to back away, but he demanded that she get inside the house or he'd shoot her. But out of fear for her life and the kids, Lily did as she was told and walked inside. After several hours of talking, she was able to convince her ex that she still loved him and forgave him for what he was doing to her. He had clearly been drinking, and after eventually breaking down into tears, Lily used this as an opportunity to rush out of the house and escape in the car. She had apparently drove for miles and had been hiding out in a hotel just outside of the state border, as she was fearful she might have been followed. After calling the police, she was told to remain in the hotel until they had done a thorough investigation. Well, it wasn't long after Lily's visit that we received a call from the local police stating that they had arrested a man in connection to the case of our missing kids, but they had been found and were in good health. We were so relieved and thanked Lily for her bravery, but although it wasn't her fault necessarily, to this day we have never let anybody else babysit our children. I was 16 years old and looking for some extra cash, so when a family in my neighbourhood asked me to babysit their 2 young children, I immediately jumped at the chance. The parents seemed nice enough and the kids were adorable. The night started out like any other babysitting job. I played with the kids, fed them dinner and put them to bed. Then I settled in on the couch to watch some TV and wait for the parents to come home. But as the night wore on, things started to get weird. I heard strange noises coming from outside, like someone was walking around and whispering. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or something, but then I heard a voice say, "Hurry up and get it over with." I froze. The kids were supposed to be asleep and I was the only other person in the house. I tiptoed upstairs and peeked into their bedrooms. They were both fast asleep, but something felt off. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was in that house with me. I tried to ignore it and focus on the TV, but then I heard a knock at the front door. I was scared at first, but eventually I built up the courage to answer the door. but there was no one there. But I noticed laughter coming from the backyard. I closed the front door, walked through the house to the backyard, and saw a group of teenagers standing in the woods behind the house, peering over the fence. I recognized one of them from school, but I didn't know why they were here or what they wanted. They called me over, and I hesitated for a moment before going out into the garden to speak to them. Looking back, I know it was stupid, but I was curious. I thought maybe they had something important to tell me. As I asked them what they wanted, one of them jumped over the fence and sprinted towards the back door of the house. He ran inside, and I instinctively chased after him, worrying about the safety of the kids upstairs. I screamed at him, demanding that he leave at once. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen and barged past me, heading back outside. His friends were all cheering and laughing at the same time, as if they'd just pulled off the heist of the century. I cursed at them and shouted that I was going to call the police, but they just ran off, laughing to themselves. As promised, I locked the doors and windows and called the police. They arrived a few minutes later and started searching for the teenagers. The parents came home shortly after that, and I told them what happened. They were shocked, but grateful that I had kept their children safe. They paid me extra money for my trouble, but I was traumatized. I couldn't sleep for weeks after that night, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I only recognized one of the kids behind the fence from my school, but I had no idea who the others were. I confronted the boy that I recognized the next day, but he just denied it, and when I'd turn around, he would snigger to his friends and whisper something. I've only babysat a few times after this experience for a few other family friends, but the way I see it, the extra cash really isn't worth the trouble. I was just a 10-year-old kid when this happened. My parents had gone out for a party, so they had hired a babysitter for me, and her name was Sarah. I remember she was a young girl, probably in her early 20s, and she seemed nice enough at first. But as the night wore on, things started to get weird. At around 8 p.m, Sarah suggested that we play a game of hide and seek. I agreed, and she went off to count while I hid. But as I was hiding, I heard footsteps coming towards me. I assumed it was Sarah, so I didn't say anything. But when the footsteps got closer, I realized that they were too heavy to be Sarah's. I peeked out from my hiding spot, and to my horror, I saw a tall, shadowy figure moving towards me. I panicked and ran out of the house, screaming for help. When my parents came back, they found me outside, shivering in the cold rain. I told them what had happened, but they didn't seem to believe me. They thought I was just imagining things, but I knew what I had seen that day, and I was terrified. The next time my parents went out, after my insistence, they hired a different babysitter. But to my horror, later that night, the exact same thing happened. This time, the babysitter's name was Jessica. Again, she was okay at first, but as the night wore on, she started acting strange. She kept staring at me with these cold, empty eyes, and she would occasionally mutter to herself in a language I didn't understand. At around midnight, Jessica suggested that we play a game of red light, green light outside. It was still raining, but she didn't seem to care. I didn't want to go outside, but she insisted. As we played the game, I noticed something that was lurking in the bushes. I tried to point it out to the babysitter, but she just laughed and said it was probably just a raccoon or something. But then that same shadowy figure started moving towards us, and I could see that it wasn't a raccoon. It was a man, dressed in all black, with a mask over his face. I screamed and ran back inside the house, but Jessica just stood there, watching me as I ran. But when I turned around to look at her a final time, she had vanished. Yet again, my parents didn't believe me at first, but this time I had the proof. I'd managed to take a picture of the shadowy figure with my phone, and I showed it to them. They were shocked, but they still didn't know what to make of it. Jessica didn't pick up her phone after that day, so we assumed it must have been an ex-boyfriend or something. After that, my parents never hired another babysitter again. They were too scared and felt guilty for putting me through all of that. They took turns staying home with me whenever they went out, but despite this, the strange occurrences didn't seem to stop. I would hear weird noises at night, footsteps in the hallway, and sometimes I even felt like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but that feeling of unease always seemed to loom over me. Luckily, there haven't been any more sightings of this mysterious man in the last few years. At one point, my parents were concerned enough that they actually called the police, but there was apparently nothing they could do other than file a report. The image on my phone was disturbing, but they said it wasn't clear enough to make out a face or any other kind of identifying features, so unfortunately I was left to my own devices. Looking back, I do have my doubts that these occurrences were 100% real. I suppose it is possible that my memories are just playing tricks on me, but every now and then I will check out that photo, and a chill runs down my spine. I live in a quiet suburban neighbourhood where nothing ever really happens. That is, until the new family moved in next door. They were a young couple with a little girl, and they seemed friendly enough. One day the couple asked me to babysit their daughter for the evening. I was hesitant at first, but they always seemed like a trustworthy family, so I agreed. They gave me the usual instructions: feed her dinner, put her to bed, and keep an eye on the house as usual. They said they would be back by midnight, and I would just need to lock up when I left. The little girl, Emily, was well behaved. We played games, watched movies, and had dinner together. As the night went on, Emily got tired and I eventually put her to bed. It was getting late, but I figured I may as well wait for the parents to come home, so I was in the living room just reading a book, when at around 11 p.m, I heard a knock at the door. I assumed it must be them, but to my confusion, it was a man. He said he was a friend of the couple, and he was there to check on the house. He said he had forgotten his key and needed to get in. I assumed because the family didn't know me too well yet that they must have sent this family friend to make sure that I was trustworthy. And the guy was very convincing, so, stupidly, I let him in. The man went straight to the basement, where he said he had left some tools earlier that day. I didn't think much of this, and I went back to my book. But then I started to hear strange noises coming from the basement. It sounded like someone was moving furniture around, but it was too loud to be just one person. I went down to the basement to check on the man, but he was nowhere to be found. The room was empty, except for a pile of old clothes in the corner. While I was looking through the pile, I was suddenly whacked on the back of my head, and I fell unconscious. Eventually, I regained my consciousness, and in a daze, I walked up the basement steps, trying to regain my focus. In a moment, everything came back to me, and I realized that the man may still be in the house. I rushed up to Emily's room, but she was fast asleep in her bed. I was so relieved, but still terrified that he may be lurking somewhere, so I went into Emily's room and immediately called the police. They promised to send a car over right away, and 5 minutes later, I heard the sirens. I had informed them that I was hiding in the bedroom upstairs with Emily, so they loudly banged on the door, announcing their arrival. The front door was unlocked, so they swiftly entered, guns drawn, and searched the entire house head to toe. They later confirmed that there was nobody there. However, the downstairs rooms were an absolute mess, and it was clear that a robbery had taken place. A report was filed, but I'm not sure they ever found the suspect. To be honest, it was my fault for letting him in the first place, so I was riddled with guilt for a while, but luckily the family did forgive me, and we're still friends to this day. But nevertheless, I would never babysit for them, or anybody else, again. I was only 8 years old when my parents hired a new babysitter for me. Her name was Mrs. Thompson. She was an elderly lady with wrinkled skin and piercing blue eyes. She would always wear a dark cloak and a black hat that covered most of her face, To be honest, she looked like a witch from one of those storybooks my mum used to read to me, so naturally, at first, I was quite scared of her. But as time passed, I started to warm up. She would always bring me candy and let me stay up late to watch scary movies with her, but there was always something strange. For example, she would talk to herself sometimes, and I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her staring at me with those piercing blue eyes. One night, my parents went out for dinner and left me with Mrs. Thompson. I think we were watching a movie when the power suddenly went out. She told me to stay put and went to check the fuse box in the basement. I sat in the dark, scared out of my mind, waiting for her to come back, but she didn't. I must have sat there for what felt like hours, but looking back, it was probably only a few minutes. I decided to go down to the basement and see what was taking her so long. As I descended the stairs, I heard strange noises coming from the darkness. I called out for Mrs. Thompson, but there was no answer. I started to panic and ran back up the stairs, but now the door was locked. I had found myself trapped, and I could hear footsteps coming closer. The door creaked open, and it was Mrs. Thompson, but she wasn't alone. She was standing there with 3 other people, and they were all dressed in black cloaks and hats. I started to scream for help, but she covered my mouth with her hand, whispering in my ear, "Don't worry, child. You're going to be okay. We're just going to play a little game." The 4 of them then tied me up and blindfolded me. I was terrified and didn't know what was happening. Eventually, they took my blindfold off, and I could see that we were in some kind of dark, creepy room that I didn't recognize. There were candles all around, and strange symbols drawn on the walls. Mrs. Thompson and the others were chanting something, and I could feel the room getting colder and smaller. Suddenly, the room started to shake, and a loud voice boomed through the walls. It sounded like it was coming from another dimension. Mrs. Thompson and the others started to scream and run around the room, knocking over the candles. I just closed my eyes, praying for it to be over, but when I opened them again, I was back in my bed, and Mrs. Thompson was standing over me, staring at me with her piercing blue eyes. From that day on, I refused to let my parents hire Mrs. Thompson as my babysitter again. I didn't tell them what had happened, out of fear that maybe it was just a dream, but I knew deep down that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than just a scary movie. I was the new babysitter for a wealthy family in the suburbs. The parents were always going out on the weekends, leaving me to take care of their 2 young children. At first, it was an easy job. The kids were well behaved and the house was quiet. But as time passed, strange things started happening. One night, I was putting the kids to bed when I heard a noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking around. I assumed it was just the parents coming home early, but when I checked the front door, it was locked. I went back upstairs and checked on the kids, but they were sound asleep, but the noise continued. So I decided to investigate further. I followed the sound to the attic, but as soon as I opened the door, the noise stopped. Everything had become completely silent. I turned on the light and looked around, but there was nothing there, just old furniture and boxes. So I shrugged it off and went back downstairs. But that was just the beginning. The next week, I was watching TV with the kids when I heard a knock at the door. I went to answer it, but when I opened the door, no one was there. I looked around, but there was no one on the street either. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. Later that night, the kids were sound asleep when I heard a noise coming from their room. I went to check on them, but when I opened the door, I saw a shadowy figure standing over their bed. I screamed and turned on the lights, but to my surprise, there was no one there. I tried to call the parents, but their phone was off. I was alone with the kids, and I had no idea what was happening. The next day, I decided to do some research on the house, and I found out that apparently the previous owners had died in a fire. Now, I didn't believe in ghosts, but the strange occurrences were starting to make me question these beliefs. The next time I was putting the kids to bed, I once again heard a noise coming from the attic. I decided to investigate, but this time I was more prepared. I brought not only a flashlight, but also a baseball bat with me. As I climbed up the stairs, I could feel a chill in the air. It was like something was watching me. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the shadowy figure again. It was standing in front of a mirror, staring at its own reflection. I didn't know what to do, so I called out to it. "Who are you?" It didn't respond, and after a few seconds, the figure quickly disappeared deeper into the attic. I wasn't brave enough to go after it, so I climbed back downstairs and called the parents. They said that we could discuss it further once they arrived home, but they didn't sound too concerned over the phone. When they got back to the house, I explained the situation again, and they just looked at each other and sighed. The mother took my hand and looked in my eyes. I could sense she was pleading with me without saying any words. I asked her if she had seen the figure before, and again she just looked to her husband and then looked back at me. Her husband reached in his pocket and pulled out $20 and handed it to me. He gestured to the front door with a look of despair on his face. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just snatched the money and walked out the house without looking back. The exchange was almost more terrifying than the figure, but ever since that day, I have refused to go back to that house, and it's safe to say, I will never babysit again. It was the middle of summer, and my parents were going out for their anniversary dinner. They had hired a new babysitter who they'd never used before. As they were getting ready to leave, my mum gave me a reassuring hug and said, "Don't worry, sweetie, the babysitter will take good care of you." But something about the woman made me feel uneasy. After my parents left, we played some board games and the babysitter read me a bedtime story. But when it was time for me to go to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I heard a strange noise coming from outside my window, so I got up to investigate. As I peeked through the blinds, I saw a figure lurking in the shadows. It was too dark to make out who it was, but I could tell that they were watching me. I quickly ran back to my bed and hid under the covers. But then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I thought it might be the babysitter checking up on me, but when I looked up, I saw that it wasn't her. Their face was obscured by a hood, and I couldn't see who it was, but my heart was racing. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out of my mouth. I closed my eyes, too terrified to move, but then suddenly, out of nowhere, it vanished into thin air. I sat up in my bed, shaking with fear. I was too scared to move, too scared to even call for help. But then I heard a voice. "Are you okay, sweetie? I heard you scream." I was so relieved to hear her voice that I jumped out of bed and ran over to her. But then I saw something that made me freeze in terror. I could see that her eyes were glowing, and her face was twisted into a sinister grin. She grabbed me by my arm and dragged me towards the window. "Come with me," she hissed. "I have something to show you." I tried to resist, but she was too strong. She pulled me out the window and onto the roof. From there I could see the entire town, shrouded in darkness, but then I heard a voice calling out my name. It was my dad, and he was home early. The babysitter looked startled and dropped me back into my room. She then ran down the stairs to speak to my dad. I was still too scared to move, but I could hear them arguing. I think my dad was demanding to know what was going on, and she was trying to explain herself. But eventually, the babysitter quickly packed up her things and left, and I never saw her again. The next morning, my dad told me that the babysitter had been fired, and that upon inspection, she had a criminal record for breaking and entering. He also said that she had been involved in a cult, and my parents believed that she was trying to recruit me. I couldn't believe what I was being told. A cult? At this time, I'd only seen them in movies, and I didn't realise that they were real things. My dad told me a few years later that she was actually arrested for a drug offence and had been in prison for several years now. But either way, that night will always stick with me. And to this day, I still struggle with being left alone in the house. It was my first time babysitting for the Thomas family. The parents, Alex and Sarah, had 2 young children, Emma and Jack, and they needed someone to watch them for the night while they attended a work event. I arrived at their house around 6 p.m, just as the sun was starting to set. The kids were both adorable, with curly brown hair and bright blue eyes. They were a bit shy at first, but I soon won them over with my silly jokes and games. We played hide and seek, watched movies and made popcorn. Everything was going smoothly, until around 9 p.m, when the phone rang. I answered it, expecting to hear from the parents, but instead I heard a deep, raspy voice on the other end. My heart started racing. "Who is this?" But the line went dead. I tried to shrug it off and continue with the evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I assumed it was just some sort of prank call, but every time I looked out the window, I could feel somebody staring at me. It got to around 10 p.m, but the horrifying night wasn't over yet, because around 10 p.m, the power went out. It was a stormy night, so I assumed it was just a temporary outage, but as the minutes turned into hours, I started to get worried. The kids were scared, and I didn't know what to do. That's when we heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I tried to convince the kids that it was just the wind or the house settling, but I couldn't ignore the fear creeping up my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way down the stairs, with Emma and Jack clinging to my sides. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the sound again. This time, it was unmistakably footsteps. I shone the flashlight around the room, but there was no one there. I tried to calm the kids down and reassure them that it was just their imagination, but I wasn't even sure if I believed that myself. That's when I heard another noise, this time coming from upstairs. It was a creaking sound, like someone was walking around in the hallway. I told the kids to stay put and slowly made my way back up the stairs. As I reached the top, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was too dark to make out any features, but I could feel the weight of its gaze on me. I froze, unsure of what to do. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. But the figure didn't answer. It just stood there, watching me. Suddenly, the power came back on. The lights flickered to life, illuminating the figure in front of me. It was a man, tall and muscular, with a scar running down the side of his face. He was wearing all black, and he held a knife in his hand. I screamed, and I heard the kids start crying from downstairs. The man lunged forward, and I knew I had to act fast. I slammed the door and ran down the stairs, pushing the kids into the nearest room. I locked the door, and I demanded that they phone the police at once. Eventually, I saw the man running down the stairs, and he started chasing me, his footsteps pounding on the hardwood floors. I could hear him breathing heavily behind me. I ran down the hallway and into the kitchen, desperately searching for any kind of weapon. But all I could find was a frying pan. Nevertheless, I grabbed it and I turned around, ready to defend myself. The man was almost upon me. when I swung the frying pan with all my strength, stunning him for a few seconds, which gave me a small gap to escape. I rushed out of the house and screamed for help. I saw a few of the neighbours' lights go on, followed by the opening of several front doors. One of the neighbours ran out towards me, asking what was wrong. I explained the situation, and he demanded that his wife call the police at once. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, the man bolted out of the house and disappeared through an alleyway. A few of the neighbours chased after him, but they never caught up. To this day, he has never been captured, but at the very least, I'm grateful that the kids were safe. Thank you for watching, and if you prefer the longer format videos, please let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to subscribe for more scary stories.